Today we're talking about the updated Dutch hormone test. If you're experiencing hormones imbalance symptoms like mood swings, brain fog, stubborn belly fat, changes around your menstrual cycle, or for men, low libido, low motivation, it could be your hormones. And if you've been to the doctor, they may either not check your hormones, or if they do, they can tell you everything's fine. But the blood test for hormones, while it can be good, is only telling you a small part. It doesn't show you how the hormones are getting metabolized or the changes in cortisol in particular throughout the day. So in this video, we're going to go through the Dutch hormone test, who it's for, and also at the end of the video, I'll talk about an alternative to the Dutch test that may be better for some people. So what is the Dutch test? Well, it stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones. Nothing to do with the country. So the way the Dutch test has the advantage over a blood test is that it shows how the hormones are getting metabolized. It measures testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. And in particular, if you've got high estrogen levels, it shows you how they're getting metabolized, which can then help you know how to improve the metabolism of the hormones so that you can get things back into balance. It can also show you if you're aromatizing testosterone into estrogen, which is important for both men and women. So women with PMS symptoms, PCOS, fertility problems, you would benefit from doing the Dutch hormone test. So men with prostate symptoms, low testosterone, potentially high estrogen, you would also benefit. For men and women, you'd both benefit from understanding the cortisol and the organic acid test markers. But the Dutch test doesn't measure everything, and it's not a replacement for a blood test. The blood test can still measure LH and FSH. They're the messages from the brain to the ovaries or the testes to make hormones. And that's important information to know. So when I do run a Dutch test, it's often good to check out the basic blood hormone test at the same time. So let's look at the new 2025 Dutch test and we'll run through a couple of sample reports. So here's a female report, and this is where someone's got the progesterone in the perfect range, estrogen in the perfect range, testosterone is also optimal. This is 5-androstenediol. This is looking at the tissue levels of DHT, which is a more androgenic version of testosterone. This is slightly on the higher side here. And then we look at total cortisol production, which is in the range, but on the higher side. And then also the free cortisol levels, or the total, which is also high. And then more importantly, I think, is the rhythm of the cortisol. It should start off low, but in this case, it goes up too high. But then in the afternoon, it drops down too low. So this person, they may have that stress response in the morning, and then they get that afternoon crash in the afternoon and are very fatigued for that rest of the day. Here's an example of the male hormone test. In this case, the testosterone is on the lower side and all the DHEA, androstenediol is also low. Estrogen's on the higher side, so this person is most likely aromatizing testosterone into estrogen. And we don't measure the progesterone on this page. With the cortisol, the reference ranges are a little bit different for men. They have a much higher cortisol output. And once again, the cortisol is very high here, but the rhythm is way out of balance. And so very high in the morning and then dropping down for the rest of the day, which is not a good combination. And you'll get that usually stressed, but tired, but wired type of feeling throughout the day when they're making plenty of cortisol, but their free cortisol is low. So this is the second page of the Dutch test for the females. And once again, this just looks like lots of fancy numbers and figures. And I must agree, it is. And the main thing I look at on this page is the total estrogen production, which for this person is right in the middle. I prefer to look at the following page when I'm explaining the results to clients though. I like to look at this page, but this next page is where you'll see all these dials. And for the first time, it may be overwhelming, but I will look at the 3 different types of estrogen, and they're all in range here. And then we want to see how the estrogen is getting metabolized. And this person's making plenty of estrogen, and you want it to be going down this green pathway here, this 2-OH estrogen pathway. And most of it's getting metabolized down this pathway, which is excellent. And very little is going down the 4-OH pathway, which has the potential to create a reactive oxygen species and lead to DNA damage and potentially things like breast cancer, ovarian cancer. And this pie chart shows that, preferentially most of it's going down this green and very little down the red pathway, which is a good thing. Also on this page, we can see the DHEAS levels, and the green is the optimal range for someone in the 18 to 40, 44 range. And then the purple is like the perimenopause, 40 to 56. And then down the very bottom here is the menopause range, in case you're wondering what all the colors mean. Testosterone levels are fine, and then testosterone gets metabolized either down this beta pathway or alpha pathway. And it's not a fair amounts going down the alpha pathway, which in women can lead to things like acne, hair loss, those types of symptoms. It can potentially be associated with PCOS, but it's not enough just looking at this to diagnose PCOS. We'll look at a different example here of the estrogen, which once again, the estrogen's on the higher side, but in this case, too much is getting metabolized down this 4-OH estrogen pathway. And this leads to a much greater risk of things like breast cancer, ovarian cancer. So this is poor phase 1 estrogen metabolism. And then also, they are producing a lot of estrogen down the 2 pathway, but the methylation activity is also low. And there's a third and final pathway, which is not tested here. That's done through a stool test like the Gutzoomer or GI map, and that's looking at beta-glucuronidase. So here we have a male version of the sex hormones, and as I said earlier, the estrogen's on the higher side, and they are metabolizing a reasonable amount down the 2-OH pathway, but we could lower the estrogen more if we improve estrogen detoxification and the methylation of estrogen. They are both low. So things like sulforaphane, DIM, those types of herbs and nutrients would help to detox estrogen. Once again, with the reference ranges, the light green is the younger men, 18 to 40, and as men age, it goes up into the dark green. So DHEAS levels are okay, but the testosterone levels are low, partly because too much is getting aromatized into estrogen. Let's have a look at the adrenal hormones now. Once again, you get a page with all the different facts and figures of the adrenals, but it is much easier to understand if you look at this page here. The first thing I'll look at is the total metabolized cortisol, and then we look at the free cortisol. And one of the new things with the Dutch test, besides putting in these new reference ranges for perimenopause, 18 to 40, and menopause, one of the new things on the Dutch test is this cortisol clearance rate. So a high cortisol clearance rate or a systemic preference towards cortisone can indicate obesity, inflammation, those types of symptoms. If there's a slow cortisol clearance rate, it might point towards things like hypothyroidism. Similar on the male side of the adrenals, the high cortisol and the very fast cortisol clearance is associated with things like obesity, inflammation. And this was the case in this situation here of someone struggling to lose weight, high insulin levels. And so it's good to look at these numbers here, but it's also good to look at thyroid and insulin and those markers. And here's another example of the adrenal hormones. Metabolized cortisol is fine, and the rhythm is quite good, starting off low, going up. But as you see here in the evening, it rises up. And this is where you'll see someone with that tired but wide feeling. They might be exhausted, but they cannot get to sleep. Cortisol clearance is okay, but they're preferentially favoring cortisone. So they're trying to de-stress, but they're not doing a good job of it. On the last page here, there's nothing much has changed on this page. This is looking at the organic acid markers, and we have B12, which is methylmalonic acid, and that's just looking at B12 at the cellular level. Xanthuronate, chironate, and quinolinate are all neuroinflammation markers, and you want these as low as possible. If these are elevated, it often indicates a B6 deficiency. This one's a biotin marker. This is looking at glutathione levels and glutathione recycling. Indicans is a dysbiosis marker. It's not as accurate as doing a stool test like the Gutzoomer or GI map, but it can be an indicator. And then we've got the markers for dopamine metabolism, norepinephrine, melatonin levels, and this very last one, 8-hydroxydeoxyguanese, is a oxidative stress marker. And you want this one to be very low. High levels of oxidative stress can lead to things like DNA damage, which we don't want. So as you can see, the Dutch test is as comprehensive as ever. They've just made it easier to understand, and you can see the different ranges from 18 to 40, the perimenopause age, and then menopause. And they've got that cortisol clearance marker, which I think is really good because it helps people easily understand why their cortisol levels may be high or low. So another new test, which is very similar to the Dutch hormone test, is the Vibrant Wellness Hormone Zoomer. It's very similar in every way, except it doesn't measure the organic acid markers except for melatonin and the oxidative stress marker. But it does measure around 10 different environmental toxins, which are known endocrine disruptors. What that means is that if your hormones are low or out of balance, it may be these hormones or endocrine disruptors that are affecting your hormones. So, particularly for women or anyone at risk of things like breast cancer or ovarian cancer, understanding these endocrine disruptors is very important. And that goes the same for men with potential prostate cancer. So the Dutch test and the hormone Zoomer test, they can be shipped virtually anywhere in the world. And you can order these tests through Planet Naturopath. The tests are super comprehensive, as you can see, but getting a consultation and someone to run through the test is very important. So you understand the test and, more importantly, know how to treat or change these hormones to make them better. And this can be done through diet, lifestyle, herbal medicine, nutrition, and in some cases, hormone replacement therapy. Let me know if you've got any questions about the Dutch hormone test or any other tests, and I'd be happy to answer them in the comments below.